Irish music is deep-rooted in American music. Starting in the 18th century, when the Irish were emigrating from Ireland to America, the majority of those immigrants settled in the Appalachian Mountains. Now, not only did they bring their families and their personal belongings with them, they also brought their music, a very distinct style of music. Now, that music, mixed with the other immigrants from Africa and Europe, created the sound known as Appalachian old-time music. And from Appalachian old-time music came country music, with a root over to bluegrass and another root over to rock and roll. On this episode, we're going to talk about Irish music, all the way from back in the day up to the modern day. Enjoy.
The KOFB studio presents Milk Crates and Turntables, a music discussion podcast, hosted by Scott McLean with his co-host, Jack Calabrese. Now, let's talk music. Enjoy the show.
Thank you, Amanda, as usual, for your wonderful introduction. This is a special St. Patrick's Day edition of Milk Crates and Turntables. The night we go live just happened to be St. Patrick's Day. So, with that, this episode we're going to be discussing, like the intro said, Irish music in America, Irish music's influence on American music, a number of topics that we're going to bring up regards to Irish music. And happy St. Patrick's Day to everybody listening. I know this is late, but it's live, so there's people watching. We're streaming live over YouTube Live, Facebook Live, and Twitch. And without further ado, let me bring on my co-host, Mr. Jack Calabrese. Or, today, he's Jackie O'Calabrese. Top of the morning, Mr. Calabrese.
Hello, Scott. How are you?
Oh, jeez. Nothing worse than an Italian guy trying to do an Irish accent.
I can barely do an Italian accent.
There you go. Okay. How you doing today, buddy?
I'm doing all right. Doing okay. I have a little bit of Irish tea tonight.
Okay. All right. It's always good. Got to keep the voice fresh.
My wife buys it, but I like it too.
Oh, boy. He's on a roll tonight. All right. So let's jump right into it, buddy. We have, this is an interesting topic. Irish music and its influence on American music. And as you heard in the intro, the Irish started really immigrating to America in the late 1840s during the potato famine, which it wasn't really a famine because there was actually plenty of food in Ireland, but the English just weren't giving it to the Irish. But that's another topic for another time.
I think that's a whole different podcast.
I think my last name, McLean, kind of tells you where I stand on all this. But
yeah, we'll stick with the rock and roll and whatnot. The Irish potato famine.
Don't get me going.
Ken Burns, are you in the house?
Don't get me going. Okay. So they came over, and again, like you heard in the intro, most of them settled around the Appalachian Mountains. And their music, the music hasn't changed since then. It's been the same music, very story-oriented. That's how they told their history. So that all started influencing a lot of music, like you heard bluegrass, country, from that Appalachian old-time music. So that brings us up to, the progression of music. Irish music kind of stayed the same for a long time. It was that you go into the Irish pub and there were instruments, the tin flute, the shillelagh, the banjo.
Penny whistle, the boran.
There you go. See? That's my boy.
So hey,
that's why I have you on this show.
Yeah. So speaking of which, a handful of years ago, Deb accompanied me. I had a business trip over to Belfast.
And who is Deb for our listeners?
Deb is my beautiful wife, Deb Blake.
And she
Irish,
is. I can vouch for that. That's
English, Irish.
Beautiful
Every now and
Irish
again,
girl.
she has a little Italian in her. for a
Oh.
brief period of time.
Okay.
So, hey, anyway, a handful of years ago, I had a business trip. I used to travel quite a bit internationally, and I actually had a trip to Belfast that I actually brought Deb with me. We actually went out to dinner with a bunch of people, and they were like, "Hey, let's go out here and here." And I was like, "No, we're tired." And instead of going back to the hotel, Deb and I jumped in a cab, and we said to the cab driver, "Bring us to the oldest, best Irish pub around." And they were like, "Oh, we'll bring you to the Crown." I was like, No, that's a tourist place. I want to go where you go. Make a long story short, they brought us to this place called Kelly's Cellars, filled with Irish. We were the only Americans in there, and our heart was just filled because we were so excited that there was a group of people in the corner playing acoustic guitar and penny whistle and whatnot. And we were excited to hear authentic Irish music in an Irish pub. And they were playing John Cougar Mellencamp. And then when they finished that, they played Neil Young. And then when they finished that, they played the Eagles. I was like, "You're going to be kidding me."
So should have went to the tourist trap.
Yeah, you're not kidding.
Well, that was the thing. Irish pubs. There's like they say, there's nowhere in the world you can go where there won't be an Irish pub. And with an Irish pub, there's always traditional Irish music.
Yeah.
Usually.
No question.
Usually. And growing up in Boston, there's three that I can think of right off the top of my head. The Purple Shamrock, the Black Rose, but the hidden gem was the authentic Irish pub in Faneuil Hall / Quincy Market, which was the Midnight Court, which every bartender and waitress in that place was right off the boat. And I don't care about politically correct. That's the term we use. They were right from the motherland of Ireland, my motherland. They didn't hire anybody from South Boston, Dorchester, Charlestown, the traditional Irish areas in Boston. So, and they always had an Irish band playing.
Well,
As a matter of fact, I believe U2 hung out there one night because they were looking for the real Irish pub in the city. And there's a lot of them around Boston, don't get me wrong, but that was the one that we frequented.
If you go to almost any Irish pub in or around Boston, Somerville, the Burren, South Boston and whatnot, almost every one of them lays claim to the fact that U2 has stopped in there.
Yeah, I suppose that's. So speaking of U2, the greatest concert story ever, June 1983, Worcester Centrum. Myself and about 30 other people from my hometown caravan to see U2, the War Tour. This story has been told thousands of times, but it's true. My co-host and my great friend Jack was there to witness it. Somehow, some way, long story short, I managed to jump up on stage and have Bono on my shoulders, singing I Will Follow. And I think, Jack, you're the one that said, there was 30 of us there, but 300 claimed to have seen it.
Yeah, no question. And I know that for a fact because I was actually the one that bought the tickets for everybody.
You are correct.
Which, by the way, there's a handful of you that still owe me money for that show. But Phil Kelly and I actually went and saw them at the Orpheum previously. So they played the Orpheum 2 or 3 nights in May. And Phil actually called me middle of the week and said, "Hey, I have an extra ticket to go see U2." And I was like, I'm tired. I'm not in the mood. And he begged me. And I was like, all right, I'll go. And just completely blown away.
Yeah.
And then, after the show, we raced back to Winthrop because there was a town party at Mark and Kevin Talent's house. And we told everybody about the show and how excited. And not too long after that, tickets went on sale for their very first headlining arena show in the United States, which was at the Worcester Centrum. It was the night that they were actually presented their gold albums for the War show. Supposedly, there are some people that say that it was staged, but they actually brought some street musician to play fiddle on right. Sunday Bloody Sunday and a couple of other songs. And absolutely, we had okay seats. They were kind of far back on the floor. And half of us were good people and took a right and went back to our seats. And half of us were naughty boys and rushed their way to the front of the stage. And even that wasn't enough. One of us breached security, stepped up on, and was Bono's seat cushion for a half song or so.
I initially just wanted to shake his hand. I kneeled down. I put my hand out. I didn't bum rush him like they do to my man Morrissey. I didn't attack him and try to hug him. And he just kind of took it from there. But we could talk about these old concert stories all night, and we will throughout the longevity of this podcast, because it will be going for a while. So let's jump right into it. I have some bands, you have some bands as usual, and we're going to discuss what we think, or, with more influential bands, or just great Irish bands that came to America. Now, I'm going to say, everyone talks about U2, and we're going to talk about U2, but I'm jumping right into a band that's close to your heart, I know, but there's a little more to this. The Pogues. Yeah, or Pogue Mahone, as they were originally called.
Kiss my arse.
Gaelic means kiss my ass. Yeah.
Kiss my arse.
They were about to go on BBC Three to do their first live show, and the producer said, we can't use that name. We're not going to do it. So they shortened it to the Pogues. But the significance of the Pogues is their authenticity. Shane MacGowan, the lead singer, who was a big face on the punk scene when it first broke in the 70s, he was a big face in the London punk scene because his face is very distinct.
Yeah,
he was actually somewhat of a celebrity in those circles due to the fact of the story that went around that he got his ear bitten off during a Sex Pistols show. But the real story is, he and this girl were dancing, and they were getting a little out of hand. They were biting each other to the point where they were bleeding. And at one point, the girl got a little overzealous, took a bottle and smashed it on the side of his head, therein disfiguring his ear. And there was a picture of it. One of the British tabloids just happened to be there, got a picture of it, and the story went out that the girl bit half his ear off. And that way, everywhere he went, you're the guy with the half an ear. So Shane MacGowan was famous in that respect. But when they started the Pogues, he literally saved Irish traditional music. He saved it by giving it that, what they call Celtic punk sound. First of all, his voice being extremely distinct. His songwriting is amazing. I'd say he's one of the top lyricists of his generation. Of course, not like my boy Morrissey, who I think is the greatest lyricist. Good Irish boy.
Yeah,
who I think is the greatest lyricist of the generation. But that's... We might not get into that. But the Pogues, I think, saved traditional Irish music, gave it a rebirth.
Well, you're right. I mean, they certainly introduced it to, a whole new audience. They put their spin on it. They had an edge. Certainly Shane MacGowan has a great edge. You're right. Absolutely great lyricist. Funny, edgy, controversial, politically tinged.
IRA.
Well, yeah, great writer. But here's the thing that a lot of people don't realize about the Pogues is that the Pogues are recognized as a great Irish band, not from Ireland. They're not from Ireland.
They were formed in England.
They were formed in England, but Shane MacGowan is not from Ireland. Spider Stacey is not from Ireland.
Shane MacGowan is from Ireland.
What's that?
He is from Ireland.
Shane MacGowan?
He grew up in Ireland up until he was 6.
He was born in England.
Well, he was raised in Ireland. He was Irish, raised in Ireland.
The band formed in England. Now, absolutely, no question about it. They are a Celtic band, and they, celebrate traditional Irish, music. I mean, it's just like, the Dropkick Murphys are not from Ireland, but they're a Celtic influenced, Irish influenced band. And
American band. We'll get to those.
Amazing, fantastic band. If you never got to see them in the 80s, you really missed something, because they were edgy and funny and, just great live musicians. I mean, there were like 12 of them up on stage. Heavy influence from Elvis Costello. And then, unfortunately, Shane MacGowan, the drink got the better of him for a little bit, and he actually left. And who replaced him? Joe
I don't
Strummer.
know. Joe Strummer, yeah.
Joe Strummer from the Clash, who produced Hell's Ditch. And then when Shane left, he actually stepped into that role. And he wasn't with them long. He did a tour with them. They never actually recorded an album with him.
So you mentioned Elvis Costello. Elvis Costello started producing one of their albums. And at one point, Shane MacGowan just told him, "Get the fuck out of here. You're doing nothing. You're getting here. You're sitting here. You're fat. And you're doing nothing." He basically told him, "Get the fuck out of here." They had something to do with the piano solo or some solo, and Elvis Costello didn't like it. And MacGowan just said, "No, you know what? I'm done with your shit. Get out." And they just went on recording the album without him. Yeah. Not to say he didn't like him. Now, they went on tour with Elvis Costello, and they tore it up. They tore it up to the point where they couldn't get kicked off the tour because they were that good. They were that popular. So, And so Mary McDonald, one of our viewers, brings up Fairy Tale of New York. Fairy Tale of New York, as you know, the highest selling Christmas song of the 21st century, was their blessing but their curse. It's a case of it was so popular that they went on this relentless tour schedule. I believe one year they did 368 shows in 365 days.
That's insane.
Literally. And that was the beginning of the end. That's when they started getting sick of each other, and he was trashed constantly. And the funny thing is, this is a crossover to a show we had a couple episodes ago, replacing the lead singer of a band. Shane MacGowan is irreplaceable, yet they tried to replace him.
They did. So, again, they started with Joe Strummer, and then Spider Stacy, who was their, penny whistle player. He stepped in.
Penny whistle player, yeah.
As a matter of fact, I actually saw them on that tour with a couple of buddies. So, hit South Boston, hit a lot of the taverns over there, hit the Littlest Bar, which was around the corner from the Orpheum. We had second row seats and just out of our minds and kept yelling Bottle of Smoke, which is a great song off of If I Should Fall from Grace of God. And we were so obnoxious that the band actually stopped and said, boys, we're not going to be playing that tonight.
Nice.
Tried to shut us up, but we kept yelling it anyway.
But I just don't think he can. And then he started a group called the Popes, interestingly enough, close enough to the Pogues. Same style. They sounded just like the Pogues, pretty much. Same type of sound. They fire him. He lost 2 jobs. But the Popes weren't really his part. They weren't even close to the Pogues. Unfortunately, now he's in rough shape. I don't know if he's got wet brain. But I think in 2015 he fractured his pelvis, so he can't walk. Yeah, he's wheelchair bound.
Yep,
which is too bad. And if you hear him talk, he's been drinking since he was 6.
Well, I can tell you firsthand that the last time we saw them, Deb, my wife, and we actually brought our 2 kids to the House of Blues in Boston. And Shane MacGowan came out, and he had a stool next to him that was holding his drinks. And on that stool, he had a cup of water, a glass of gin, a glass of beer, and a full bottle of Sauvignon Blanc. And by like the 3rd or 4th song he was singing, he had that bottle of Sauvignon Blanc balanced on his head. He was a mess.
So Mary McDonald says they're Brits. They might be Brits, but they sing Irish songs.
Yeah,
now, they're not getting into this Celtic thing. The Celtic isn't necessarily Irish. Celtic is pretty much considered Irish, Scottish, and Welsh. That's that Celtic sound. But when you hear the Pogues, they're singing about the IRA. He was an avid IRA supporter because he was Irish. And they were going through the troubles in the 70s and then into the 80s. So you're going to get this mix. The Waterboys. The Waterboys are known as an Irish band, but Mike Scott is Scottish. It's made up of, it's a Celtic sound, which is acceptable in this conversation, I do believe. The Waterboys are made up of Irish, English, Scottish, and Welsh. But people call them an Irish band. Which I think is
and that's true of the Pogues. I mean, there's the majority of the Pogues were actually, from England, but they played Irish music. Nothing wrong with that. It doesn't mean that it's not legitimate.
Morrissey was Irish, and his family went to England. McGowan's family left Ireland. There was no work there. There was nothing. His mother fell into a mad depression. The father was a nice guy, but he was kind of a freestyle hippie kind of, easygoing guy. But they left Ireland because there was no work there. He grew up pretty much in England, but they hated it. But then he got into he got old enough to enjoy the nightlife, and there you have it. That's the beginning of that. So I think we've covered we can probably talk about the Pogues a lot. They're a very interesting group.
They're one of my favorite bands of all time.
They're unbelievable. And Shane McGowan and he hates being called a poet. He says that's an insult.
But he is. But
he says that's an insult to his songwriting. That's how he deems it. It's an insult to his songwriting.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting take, and brilliant people have those interesting takes.
He had the capability of writing a beautiful love song. He could write about relationships, but he also had a great edge to him. And if you listen to some of the lyrics, especially on Rum, Sodomy, and the Lash, or If I Should Fall from Grace of God, some of his lyrics are just gut punches. And some of them are about the dregs of society. And some of them are very political. He could do it all.
Absolutely. And he had a face made for radio.
That he did.
Not
like the two handsome guys on this podcast.
As usual. Yes, we are. Okay, so what do you got for me? Bring up an Irish band, an Irish American band, whatever you want to talk about.
There aren't. The funny thing is if you look at like bands that became really, really popular that actually came out of Ireland, there aren't that many of them. There are some that have actually had a decent amount of success. But in terms of being just huge, enormous bands, you have Van Morrison.
Yes.
And you have U2.
Well, I think in rock history, you look at Thin Lizzy. I mean, Thin Lizzy came out of nowhere.
Yeah, but they never really attained the mass appeal that they strive for, and that was
Phil and Not Dying didn't help.
Well, even long before that. So wait a minute. So if you go back to 1976,
right?
Thin Lizzy had their breakthrough album with Jailbreak, and they had The Boys Were Back in Town.
Yeah.
That was on the Billboard 100 for like 17 weeks or something crazy like that. So, the American record companies were really excited about Thin Lizzy. They were going to break America. They were going to be this big thing. And what happened? Phil Lynott, or Lynott, I'm not even sure how to pronounce his name, contracts hepatitis. How does he contract hepatitis? He used a dirty fucking needle to shoot up heroin.
He died of sepsis.
So he ends up with hepatitis. They have to cancel the tour. They come back a couple of months later, and their drummer, I believe, ends up in a barroom brawl and breaks his hand. So they have to scrap the tour again. And then, Phil Lynott, they come back to try to do the tour again. And Gary Moore, who is a phenomenal guitar player, quits the tour halfway through. And by that point, with the drug abuse and whatnot, the American record company said, you know what? That's it. These guys are way too much trouble. And they never really recovered from there. They never really broke in the United States. And as you had indicated, Phil Lynott, he went into total drug addiction and ended up getting really sick and died really young. And it's a shame.
Like I said, most
people in the United States, if you talk about Thin Lizzy, they know The Boys Are Back in Town. They might know tonight there's going to
Jailbreak.
be a jailbreak. But what they might not know is their Live and Dangerous album is one of the greatest live albums ever. And I'm not sure how many records they put out, but I mean, it was like a dozen, 15 or something. Like, they were prolific. And Phil Lynott was a really great writer as well, but they blew it.
So I'm thinking, you're saying not a lot of people came out of Ireland that were famous. I think you're not giving any credit to the great, the one and only, Mr. Gilbert O'Sullivan.
I'm leaving now.
Come on.
No,
Gilbert O'Sullivan had some big hits in the 70s, baby.
Yeah. Is it Alone Again Naturally?
We were supposed to do the Guilty Pleasures show tonight, but that's moved to next week. I think Gilbert O'Sullivan's coming up on that show. So he's going to get
is he the Alone Again Naturally guy?
Yeah, naturally. Yes.
He should have stayed in Ireland.
21 years old. Yeah, my mother got arrested. So, which got sampled by what group?
I have no idea off the top of my head.
In the 90s. I just want to fly.
Oh.
Sugar Ray referenced the Gilbert O'Sullivan song. Yeah.
Another great Irish band.
Hey, Mark McGrath. He's an Irish American. So there you go. All right. We're rolling with it.
He looked like a guy that hung out in Faneuil Hall in Boston.
Oh, boy. Okay. So let's, we could talk about U2, but.
Well, we should. I think we should talk about U2.
We have to. And there's not really much that hasn't been said about them. I mean, they're a great band. A borderline political band.
The biggest band that ever came out of Ireland, bar none. The most popular band that came out of Ireland, bar none. The most popular band, of the 80s. You can make the argument that they were the most popular band out of the 90s. The funny thing is it seemed like at one point in the mid 80s that everybody loved that band, but there's almost as many people now that hate U2 as much as they love them. And there are a lot of, arguments or, comments about them. Bono is an egomaniac. The Edge doesn't know how to play guitar. They're overplayed. They're arrogant. And there's probably some validity to some of that stuff. I never really bought into the whole thing about the Edge not being able to play his guitar. He had his way of playing guitar, and he certainly leveraged technology, but I don't see anything wrong with that. I don't see anything wrong with that at all.
One of our steady viewers on the show, Stephen Romano, really loves U2.
Oh,
he wants us to continue the conversation.
There is a contingent in Winthrop. There's a bunch of people that just hate that band, and it's probably because we loved them so much. But you have to admit, U2, as much as you and I love U2, and I love that band and have always loved that band, they have given people a lot of reasons to hate them. Oversaturated, overplayed. They force their music on everybody's iPod.
I don't think Adam Clayton and Larry Mullen Jr. gave us any reason to hate them. I think it's one person in particular. I don't think the Edge even has a problem with anybody. It's one person in particular. So,
can you see that?
Oh, nice. Bono and Deb. Why isn't he on her shoulders?
Easy now.
Hey, all right. You started it earlier, so.
Here's the thing that I will say about U2, and I might compromise my credibility by saying this, but the reality of it is whether people appreciate it or not, it's certainly something that I appreciate. Is I still think that they're actually putting out decent music. I thought that their last record, it's not iconic. It's not the Joshua Tree. It's not the Unforgettable Fire. It may not even be all the things you can leave behind. But it was a pretty decent record that had a lot of solid material on it. But I think people have a tendency to get a little bit lazy. It took me a while to get into that record, but I think there's a lot of good stuff on it. At the same time, I actually think that they made a big mistake because they wanted to do this concept thing. With the last two records that they released, they did The Age of Innocence and then The Age of Experience. They really should have taken their time and combined those records into one, pulling the best stuff out. And I think that they would have had a lot more success with them.
Probably the success of U2 in the 80s led to every record company, every record producer, every cutthroat con man from a record company wanting to pull something out of Ireland. They thought it was like this hotbed of music. So in the 80s, you had this group called the Hot House Flowers from Ireland, but their sound was kind of they came out around 85. It's kind of a gospel soul sound. There was really nothing particular to it. They had a couple of hits, but they were just one of those groups that they were trying to pluck out. Oh, let's bring them over because it's the Irish thing now.
Well,
the Irish wave. There was no Irish wave.
Very humble beginnings. So the two principal people in the Hot House Flowers, they actually started playing out on the street. They were buskers.
Yeah, they were street performers. Yeah.
So then they grew in popularity, and actually it was Bono from U2 that reached out to them and said, hey, we can definitely give you guys a hand. I think they were on U2's label initially and then went to, I think it was Polydor or whatnot. And you're right. They had a couple of good songs. Their second album, or the third album, Home, had some really promising things on it. And I thought that they were actually going to be a lot bigger than they ended up being. The next album that they did, the critics loved it, and it went absolutely nowhere. No radio airplay.
Critics don't mean anything. Yeah.
Yeah. They radio play just didn't happen. They toured relentlessly trying to, get their popularity up, and it just didn't happen. And I don't think they ever recovered from that. Couple of good songs, not a great band, great live band. They were really fun live.
Yeah, again, this sound was kind of lost in the mix. I always say that about certain groups, or there's certain eras where they just try to saturate. So, also in the 80s, we have the one and only Sinead O'Connor makes her debut in 87 with what I think was not only one of the greatest debuts of that decade, I'd put it in maybe my top three. The Lion in the Cobra, phenomenal. It's what I call a perfect album. Great song from beginning to end. Mandinka, I think, was the hit off that. But the whole album, if for the people listening, if you've never listened, put her personal life and her politics aside. If you want to hear a perfect album from a great Irish singer, her voice is pitch perfect. Get The Lion and the Cobra. Get her debut album from beginning to end. It's an amazing album. Highly, highly, highly recommend that.
Her second record's not bad either. There's a lot of good stuff on her second record.
So that's where it ends.
Yeah, it didn't go beyond that. So my personal experience with the whole Sinead O'Connor thing. So I actually got to see her on her first tour when she played the Paradise, broadcast on WBCN. Great show. Then we actually saw her on her next tour where she played the Orpheum. And then, when Deb and I first got together, we actually went and saw her down at Great Woods in Mansfield, Massachusetts. And it was awful. But I think I'd have to ask her, but I actually think we left early, and I don't think she ever recovered from that third record. And she's struggled ever since. She got political, ripping up the picture of the Pope, which is fine. You can get away with ripping up the picture of the Pope as long as you actually have the music to back it up, and I don't think she did.
I think at that time that was, if she did it today, they would love her. They would think that's the greatest thing in the world, but that's today, and we're not going to get political. The woke generation would absolutely adore that move. But anyways, she was a victim, just like the Pogues were, of Fairy Tale of New York with Nothing Compares to You. And don't say written by Prince, everybody, because I said this, I think, in the second episode. People need to stop saying that because everybody knows. Hey, Nothing Compares to You. Do you know Prince wrote that? Stop. Just stop it. Okay? Everybody knows. The song was so fucking big that she could never get beyond that. That is a pinnacle that a lot of people can't. And she ended up being bipolar, so that added to her stress and the pressure.
Yeah.
You know,
She
and no one knew it at the time, though. No one knew it.
That last time that Deb and I saw her where she got political, that was too much for us, which is really interesting because as a rule, quite frankly, like I'm a huge Pearl Jam fan. I love U2. I love Bruce Springsteen, and for every one of those people, I've had people say to me, "How can you go see them? Like, you know, they're so political. Like that would drive me nuts." It was like, really? Do you think that Bruce Springsteen or Eddie Vedder, for that matter, actually influences my politics? I'm there to listen to the music. What they talk about in between the songs, I could give a shit.
Yeah. So, one of our viewers, I think it's on YouTube, Scott Locke, said, "How about Flogging Molly?" So we can transition over into the current how Irish music, and I always say the Pogues influenced all of this.
Sure.
They influenced, because if you listen to Blackfoot 56 or any Irish band, you know, the Dropkick Murphys, they all sound like the Pogues. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's exciting. It's energetic. It just gets you all pumped up. Now, these groups these American Irish groups or Irish American groups that form, they pretty much do the same thing. They tell stories. They try to hang on to the Irish traditions. Now, Flogging Molly, oddly enough, everybody seems to think these big Irish American bands are from New York and Boston. They're from California.
Yeah.
That scene, the Irish music scene, is everywhere. And this goes back to what I originally said at the beginning of the show. The Irish were in the logging camps of Wisconsin, and they were in the ranches of Texas. So Irish music is planted everywhere around this country. California even, like I said, Flogging Molly, you know? They're one of those Irish American bands that people have heard. They're not the most popular, but again, there's groups from all over America. These Irish American groups.
So
not all from Boston and New York.
Yeah. The thing that I will differ with you is, I mean, I think you're right that the Pogues influence, but I think you have to go back a little bit further. One of the things that you and I keep going back and forth about is like the origins of punk. You know, you keep talking about, you know, the Damned, the Ramones, and all that. But you know, you got to remember that prior to U2 in, you know, the late 70s and their first album in 80, or even the Pogues, you got to remember that part of that initial punk movement over in Europe was Stiff Little Fingers back in like 77, 78. If you're interested, if anybody that's listening to this right now, if you're interested in listening to some authentic, real punk rock back in the early days, you got to check out Stiff Little Fingers. Great band.
Before Stiff Little Fingers, though, were the Radiators from Space. They had a hit. Their hit was the only punk song. It was called Television Set, I believe. It was the only punk song ever to be on the Irish Top 20.
I don't know that.
Radiators from
check
Space.
them out.
Yeah. Again, and I since I've been doing this show, we've been doing this show, I have had an entirely renewed interest, as you can tell, in punk, going back and digging out old stuff, punk and funk. Now, I don't know if it's in the wording, the lettering, but those two genres I have absolutely done a total deep dive into, and I love it. I love it. I love punk all over again.
Yeah,
the beauty of
especially
music,
that old stuff is great. You know, look, the Ramones blazed the trail.
Yeah, you almost got me on that. See, I'm doing three things at once. Yeah. You just get to sit there and sound.
Blaze the trail.
Yeah,
they were the ones that broke it wide open.
Hey, we jumped right past. I think. Okay, this could be argued. Maybe the preeminent Irish band of the '90s, the Cranberries.
The Cranberries.
Okay,
Sad
I know
story.
U2 came out with some massive But the Cranberries came in like a ball of thunder out of nowhere with Dolores O'Riordan and that yodeling. She could make yodeling sound beautiful, which is a talent in itself.
She was a force with her bums and her guns and her bums and her bums.
Well, the first album, what? Everyone else is doing it, so why can't we?
Yeah.
Right?
Great record.
Yeah. It had Linger. Now, Linger is one of my
Beautiful
favorite
song.
songs of all time.
Yeah.
And they came out with, I don't know, 4 albums, and then they kind of hit the ruts. They took a 6-year break. There's something going on there.
Well, the lousy thing about the Cranberries is everybody kind of like labels them that they're looking for the next Zombie or Linger, and because they weren't able to maybe live up to that level of popularity, people write them off or whatnot. But if you actually dive into some of those records, even some of their later records, they were actually really, really good. There's some quality stuff on there. But American radio and American music and MTV really going down in terms of quality and breaking new bands, we're not great in terms of actually exploring and listening to new bands. We like comfort. We like listening to the same shit over and over again.
Well, that's the Nothing Compares to You, and it's people thrive for it, and then it's done.
That was written by Prince, by the way.
You know what? You're an asshole. This show was going good.
Manic Monday, too.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I feel better. Okay. Jack was testing me about 2 minutes before the show. So I think he wanted to get my energy up this show. So
look, we're starting to run out of time. We have to spend a little time talking about Van Morrison, don't we?
Absolutely, if you'd like to.
Were you a big Van Morrison fan, Scott McLean?
I did like Van Morrison. I still like listening to Van Morrison. I'm sick of fucking Brown Eyed Girl, though. I turn that off faster than I can reach the radio dial.
It would be interesting if we could actually take a poll of the people that are listening right now. Like, how many of you, when Brown Eyed Girl comes on the radio, do you actually sit and listen to it? Yeah, and you know what else kills me about Brown Eyed Girl is where you live down in Florida. And I'm not saying, Boca specifically, but, Key West or Fort Lauderdale or, places in Orlando. How many places do you walk by where they have an acoustic guitar player, where they're serving fruity drinks, where there's some guy singing Brown Eyed Girl? or Into the Mystic.
Yeah, Mary McDonald mentioned Into the Mystic. Yep. Yeah.
But Van Morrison, obviously an absolute legend. Just prolific. I'll tell you, for me, Van Morrison, tough to keep up with. That guy puts out so much music. He puts out records so often. It's overwhelming.
I wasn't a huge Van Morrison fan. I like him, but he wasn't one of those people that I kind of followed or went after or, bought everything he put out. But I enjoy listening to him. I think I probably have, I don't know, maybe 3 Van Morrison albums.
Yeah, I mean, those early ones, Moondance, obviously, and Tupelo Honey is a great record, and Astral Weeks is a masterpiece. I mean, those are the pinnacle. But when you move on into the latter part of his career, maybe not great albums, but great songs on good albums. He always had a certain level of quality, and notoriously a cantankerous old prick. The thing about Van Morrison, and I've never really invested a lot of money in going to see him live because it was notorious that if you caught him on a good night, he was amazing. But more often than not, he dialed it in or wasn't into it or any of that stuff.
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned Prince earlier, and one of our viewers, Mark Flynn, said, "Hey, Jack, you know who Prince never wrote a song for? You, or the Go-Go's."
So you know why? Do you know
Another
why Prince
Go-Go's
never wrote a
reference.
song for the Go-Go's?
Why?
Because they wrote their own music and they played their own instruments, and they're the only female band that was at the top of the charts, that played their own instruments, wrote their own music, and they had a huge, huge hit and will absolutely end up in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Good Lord, save me. Is this show almost over? Okay. I mean, they are now mentioned every show's 4 shows in a row and going. So yeah, there's a scene in Dublin going on, and like I said, it's been going on for a little while. There was that garage band, almost that Van Morrison with them kind of sound. And a couple years back, I pulled this one out. This is for the listeners. It's a group called the Black Temple Shrines. The Black Temple Shrines. It's like a modern day 45. It's about half the size of a regular LP. It's got 6 songs on it, and this one happens to be, as I love these splatter platters, these colored discs. I can't find hide nor hair of them right now. I've kind of looked around. I've actually tried to contact them to see if they're still out and about. I don't know if they are, but there's a good postmodern punk sound going on too. And I came across, I'll go into Jack's world. Since I like to dive backwards and Jack likes to dive forward, every once in a while I dive forward too, and Jack will dive backwards too and do these deep dives on groups. I came across this group called the Murder Capital from Ireland. They're really good. They're only a couple years into it. They're really good. They kind of have a Joy Division. It's hard to really put it together sound. Let me see. What did I say? Joy Division and Joy Division and the Pixies. That's who it sounded like. It's quite a little unique sound. So if you get a chance to go on YouTube, check out the Murder Capital. Good Irish band. Hopefully they break through. They come over here to the States. And there's another group called Fontaine Dc. Great sound. Again, relatively new. Not much information on them, from Ireland. In that same postmodern punk sound. So yeah, give those bands a listen. Go over to YouTube and check them out. They actually got Album of the Year on BBC Radio 6. The album's called, what was it? Dogrel, Dogrel. So they got some buzz going on over there. So yeah, that's kind of the new stuff that I dug forward on.
Always fun to listen to the new stuff and to find out what people are doing, and always fun to dive back. You end up missing a lot of stuff. There's a lot of music that came out, and it's really kind of fun to explore both sides.
And that's the thing about music, like you get stuck in that, say in the 80s, that U2 rut, but you missed a whole little thing going right by you. It's hard to pay attention to everything. And music can be rediscovered. Once it's out, doesn't mean it's old. It's always new to somebody that's never heard it before, right? Right? So, what do you got? Let's jump right into the segment that usually runs to the end of the show. What's new? What do you got? What did you get this week? Anything? Did you come out with anything?
Yeah. So, again, and the only way that I've been able to justify this is I'm not spending money on concert tickets right now because of the whole COVID thing. So I've been experimenting and building up the record collection, and I've been going kind of both backwards and forwards on different things. Spending a lot of time. It's fun being back in record stores again and experimenting. So the first thing I got is a record by an artist called Nujabes. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right or not, but it's Nujabes, and this is really kind of a funky, loopy, spoken word type thing. Really, really good, really kind of interesting. Actually turned on by my kids. Then, as stated, still in my jazz thing right now, so I actually picked up a new record by Felonious Monk, actually put out on mono. In another classic and a song, a record that a lot of people probably remember, and this is one of the most popular jazz albums of all time, which is Time Out by the Dave Brubeck Quartet. The cool thing about these reissues is they're actually doing them, repressing them, and the sound is absolutely amazing. Just really different. And then, last but not least, so you talk about exploring the origins of punk, and I'm doing the same. Going backwards and moving forwards and whatnot. Actually got a box set. This one was kind of hard to find, but out of Washington, the Sonics. This is a 3-record set, really edgy, gritty stuff. Really kind of looked at as the forefathers of what eventually would be the punk movement. So those are the things that I'm listening to this week.
You like
it hasn't stopped yet.
You like Dave Brubeck?
Sure.
I'm pretty sure there's probably, I don't know, at least 20 Dave Brubeck albums at my father's house that I'll get you next time I go up there.
You do that.
That they're all in great. My dad was really good at taking care of his albums. He was the palms on each end of the disc, the clean it even though it's clean. He had so. They're in great condition. They're yours, my friend.
Was Dad a big jazz fan all around, or just Brubeck?
He hated rock. He hated pretty much, but he liked Dave Brubeck because he had a bunch of his albums.
Yeah.
My father wasn't really like a true music guy in that sense. Like he I remember one time we're driving, me and my brothers. I'm the youngest of 3 boys, so I was probably, 8 or 9. And my brother Colin, my oldest brother, had put a Rolling Stones 8-track in my father's car. And probably about 4 songs into it, my father rips it out of the 8-track player and throws it out the window without saying a word. Literally ripped it out and threw it out the window. Never to be played again in my father's car. Yeah, he liked the Beatles and stuff like that. He was into it. So I did a deep dive back to the day again on my funk kick, and I came up with this beauty. Now, for the people that are listening, Jack and I don't buy CDs. We all have MP3s, but our passion is buying vinyl records, and I am a traditionalist. I like original pressings or unique pressing like a Japan import, or if I have to buy a brand new pressing, I like to at least have a colored disc. Throw me a bone, right? But this particular album by Dyke and the Blazers, okay? Dyke and the Blazers were from Phoenix. They were some of the originators of the funk sound. Now, not the funk sound that you hear George Clinton and Sly and the Family Stone. They recorded they recorded 2 albums, I think, from 65 to 71. They were done in 71 when, Alistair Dyke Christian gets shot in the street in Phoenix over what they think was a drug deal. That was the end of Dyke and the Blazers. But the sound, they released a handful of singles. There was some re-releases in 83, I think in 99 and 2008, some compilations. I believe what I have now is We Got More Soul, The Ultimate Broadway Funk, Dyke and the Blazers, a 2-record set. Now, Dyke and the Blazers, oddly enough, sound similar to James Brown and the JBs. This is where I think James Brown was probably, how would you put it? He got the moniker the Godfather of Soul. I'd say James Brown was the Godfather of Funk because that was the funk sound. How many times in a James Brown song, or how many songs do you hear James Brown say, "Ain't it funky now?" Right? That was funk back then. Funk evolved into the 70s and then, into the 80s. It created its own. If you listen to funk now, it's totally different. But Dyke and the Blazers, hard to get original stuff. Really hard to get. A little expensive. I won't break the bank on these things. So I got, the reissue. You go on Amazon, and it's like there's one left. They're hard to find. So if you want to hear some good, and the thing about funk, this is what I like about funk. You could put on a funk album from start to finish, and all the songs are good, except some are great. That's the difference. Funk, you could put it on in the background. You can have a party. You're not jumping, I got to go move the needle. Oh, I hate this song. Funk just has that move to it where you could put it on 3 and let the whole side play out. That's the thing I love about this old funk. Good music, good sound, good quality, top musicians. And, that's what I got, buddy. Dyke and the Blazers. So you can go on YouTube if you want to check them out. Maybe you want to
I definitely want to check them out. So,
how did you let me ask, I'm sorry. How did you like the Betty Davis album? Did you
I loved it.
It's great, right?
Yeah. I went and picked it. It's right there.
Yeah. I mean, how hot was she?
I do have to tell you. So you actually pulled that out at the end of it was at the last show, and I was inspired to go and get it because I'm always looking to listen to something new. And I woke up early the next morning, hadn't had my coffee, was a little bleary-eyed. It was on my laptop. It may have even been my phone, where I was actually going to order that album. And actually, I went to Spotify, and I could not find it because I kept typing in Betty White.
Oh. Yeah. Quite a singer. Quite a performer.
Not the greatest funk singer, though. Not the greatest funk singer.
Yeah, Betty White, she tried. Yeah, give her an A for effort. She's better than the Go-Go's, but
she was the golden funking girl.
Oh, you know what? We're going to end the show on that bad joke. You will go down in podcast history as the worst joke ever to end a podcast.
It's early in our shows. There's more bad jokes to come.
All right. Well, my friend, we've conquered another episode in this
Quick
podcast.
Hour.
Yes, it was. I think we pulled it off. Although people didn't think there was a lot to talk about Irish music, we still had a couple of things linger.
Oh, God. You just had to top my bad joke.
Yeah, I was just going to say I had to top the bad joke.
By the way, St. Patrick's Day tonight, 29 years ago tonight, U2 and the Pixies played at the Boston Garden on the Zoo TV tour.
What year was that? 29 years ago?
92.
92, I was stationed in probably Southern California by this time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, one of the, there are some sites, that talk about the best concerts that ever played in Boston. And there's a lot of people that actually talk about that show just because Irish band, St. Patrick's Day, kind of the peak of their popularity. There were thousands of people on the street trying to get in. It was crazy. Crazy.
I bet. So, all right, my friend, hang in there. Stay on. To the listeners, thank you for listening. For the viewers, thank you for viewing. Go to our podcast, Milk Crates and Turntables, on Spotify, iPod Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, and many other platforms. Go in, like it, rate it, leave a comment, even if it is to just say hi, as our announcer Amanda will say soon. And we appreciate you following us, and pass it on. This is what they call in the podcast industry a call to action. So when you get the podcast, share it. Share it with a friend, and let's grow this thing. You guys that are listening are on the ground floor of hopefully what we think will be a pretty good podcast in the future. And with that, thank you again for listening. Thank you for watching. And we'll see you next Wednesday night for the viewers. And this podcast will be out probably by Friday. All right. Thanks for tuning in.